So when I built my current computer back in November of 2014, I bought the Swiftech H240X to go with it as my main cooling solution. At the time, I had an AMD 7970 as my GPU. It was already a little old. The 290 was out. I think the Fury was in rumor stage. Nobody knew a lot about it, but it was on the way. NVIDIA still was in the 7, I think the 8 series was about to come out, something like that. But there really wasn't a lot of point in getting a fancy water cooler or block for the GPU at that time, so I stuck with just the Swiftech H240. And I bought it for the sole purpose of eventually expanding the loop. I'd thought about going with a full-on custom loop, but it just didn't seem like the right idea at the time, at least within my budget, because I was buying a lot of higher-end parts and trying to make them last 6-7 years as my previous build had. Well, fast forward a little bit. I got the 1080 Ti last summer, and when I look at the copper blocks and the other stuff that would fit in my Swiftech loop if I expanded it and do all the math and add up all the cost, it just doesn't really seem like good value for money. Now, it is a good block. I'm not going to knock any of the Swiftech products. And the H240X has been a really solid block. It's delivered some pretty good performance for me. Right now, my CPU is at about 4 gigahertz. And the temperatures under the heaviest load I usually put on it is a video encode or a render out of Adobe Premiere. And usually the temps peak at about 60 to 64, depending on how long it sustains each individual frame or period in the rendering block, because rendering goes up and down with what needs to actually be encoded. So the CPU is not really hit that hard. I don't run a lot of benchmarking programs or synthetics on it because it's just not realistic. That type of a load doesn't seem like I'm never going to hit that type of a load. So I don't bother with the synthetic benchmark. So the only one I ever really run is the Intel supplied one, just to make sure that the CPU and memory are actually kind of stable within the environment that I've got them set up in. And again, 60, 65 Celsius is the peak I get right now in the summertime. So it's pretty hot down here in Texas. Now, I do want to water cool my GPU because I want to, again, push them a little farther and make the components be viable for a little bit longer. When I started looking at the Swiftech, I said price was a little bit too high. Good products, but a bit too high. Custom loop, way out of the price range. Well, about 6 to 8 months ago, EK came out with the A360G, which was a really enticing kit. So I waited for some mainstream reviewers to put out some product and some end users to put out some reviews. And Jay's 2 Cents and a couple of others, Hardware Canucks, I think, did a couple of reviews on it. And the initial reviews were really good. They showed that the product was well made, the kit came with everything you needed, and it was a good kit. What they never showed, especially on Jay and some of the others, was they never went beyond that at all. So Jay had, I think, a 7600 or something like that, I think, on his with a regular 1080. Didn't really overclock it at all. Had really good temperatures on it, and it was very impressive what the kit did, but it didn't really push it beyond where the stock performance was. Now, I'm not a crazy overclocker. I'd like to get to 4.2, 4.4 on my CPU, and my GPU, I know I can hit 2100 on it. I've done it. I did it on stock voltage with Afterburner. I didn't bump the voltage up any. I just bumped up the memory and the fans and all that stuff. And I did get a little bit of instability when playing Fortnite. It was a less intensive load, and I wanted to start with that. I did get some courtesy boots, so I know I need to bump the voltage up to it. But for regular operations and some basic stuff, I had no problems with it. So I'm pretty sure I can hit 2100 without any major problems. Temperatures are where I'm really going to hold back on, because I don't want to push the CPU to 80 plus, or the GPU to 80 plus Celsius without having a better cooling solution. So I looked heavily at the A340, and knowing that my 5820K CPU is a soldered CPU, or the block, the internal, can't remember the name right now. I'll probably put a subtitle up with it right here. But it's soldered onto the actual die. So I can't delid the CPU and put in better TIM or anything like that to improve the cooling performance of the CPU off that end of it. So I'm kind of stuck with a very, it's not super hot, but it is a warm CPU. It's not a cool one that runs at a lower temperature. So I got to be a little mindful of that. But again, I should be able to hit 4.2 and 4.4 with 2100 on the CPU and still maintain, I'm hoping, about 70 Celsius kind of across the board in a stable on the GPU, and maybe stay 60, 65 on the CPU. In that range, then I think it'll be a success. I did look around Christmas time, because I did email EK and say, hey, are you coming out with a 360 kit? And they're like, yeah, we got one coming out at Christmas. Well, Christmas came around and they released the 360 Rad, not the kit. couple months back, I'm just randomly looking online and I go, hey, they got an A360 kit now. Great, that's exactly what I wanted, because my case has room for a couple of 120 mil fans, but without taking out all of my hard drive racks, I can't put a 240 in there. And then buying the 360 plus the 240, again, bumped that price up a little more than where I was comfortable doing it. So now that I've got a 360 rad, I think this will be a great kit and be perfect for my system. So let's take a look at what I bought. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time unboxing everything, but I do want to pull it out and talk a little bit about A, how it's packaged, B, what you get, and just kind of show how well it's packaged and any initial concerns with any of the gear I've got. So let's take a look. So the first thing I did was look at fluid. The kit comes with the concentrate, gives you the mixing ratio and all that, and this is not a bad thing, but I did want to get some color. This comes as clear, so I'm going to keep that as kind of a backup option. So I bought the EK Cryo Fuel in navy blue. Doesn't exactly match my current case because my MSI 7 or my MSI whatever version I have, I bought it in navy blue. It doesn't exactly match my current theme. It'll match the white case and the black interior just fine. The motherboard has a bit of red in it and my RAM sticks are red, so not a perfect match, but I don't care. I like blue. I like this color the best, and the red seems like it might stain. I know it doesn't likely stain, and I did some research and it didn't show a lot of staining, but just the way I wanted it. So I also got 3 90-degree fittings. So I'm gonna have my pump mounted at the very bottom of the case. It's going to run out of there into the GPU, into the CPU, into the radiator, and then all the way back down. And to do that, I'm going to need 2 90 degrees down at the pump, and then a 90 degree out of the CPU to go up into the radiator. That's saving as much tubing as possible, because I do have a full tower, and there's not really a lot of good placements within the case. And I kind of mapped it out before I did this, and I think the best spot's going to be for the radiator pump, or the radiator, the reservoir pump to be on the bottom. Now, some people like to complain about loop order and all that stuff. It really doesn't matter. Sure, if you've got multi radiators in the case and you're jumping between components, then it may make a difference to have the CPU or the liquid come out of the CPU into the 120 and then down into the GPU, and then from the GPU maybe into the big radiator and then back down. So that may play a bit of a difference in the way the loop cools each component. But again, it's really not going to make that big of a difference long term, because the loop will eventually reach a saturation point where it can't contain or dissipate any more heat, and the temperature will be kind of consistent throughout the overall loop. Sure, some components may be hotter than other components, but again, the loop's going to reach saturation. So the order of components really doesn't make that big of a difference. So with that said, 3 90-degree components. Next thing I got, I've usually used some Arctic Silver style TIM. I'm going to go with Cryonaut. I've seen a lot of different, Thermal Grizzlies Cryonaut. I've seen a bunch of different reviews of this stuff, and it seems to do a little better than the Arctic Silver and some of the Arctic MX, different versions of it. So I think this will be a good one to get. I look forward to seeing how that actually performs. Haven't used it before. Next, I actually had to buy these separately after I saw how short some of the cords are in here. So these are PWM power cable extensions, because I don't have a lot of headers. The motherboard, I think, has 3 different headers on it that are PWM, but with me having to mount the radiator on the top of the case with 3 fans up there, and then they do have a cable here, I'll show you, but then the pump at the bottom, in order to get the pump up into the CPU slot, I'm going to need a couple of these, and then to get all the fans where they need to go, I'm going to need a couple of these. Now, Swiftech, to their benefit, did give a PWM splitter box. So they have, I think, 1 for the pump, and then they have 5 or 6 for the fans. So you can plug all those in, and it's just one solid box with a pretty lengthy cable that runs down into the motherboard. Now, that's a nice thing and a bad thing. It depends on how you want to cool your system. With that, you have the option of everything being controlled at once. So the CPU is the main header. When the CPU reaches a certain temperature, everything starts to happen for all the components that are plugged into this breakout box, or splitter as it were. Now, the pump speed will ramp up at the same time that the fans ramp up, and I can hear it every now and then. If I really start a load, I'll hear the fans go kind of like you're starting up a big server or something like that, where everything kicks on at 100% and then dials itself back as the cooling takes effect. Now that's not a bad thing, but maybe you don't want the pump to throttle up as fast, or maybe you want the pump to be what speeds up first and the fans to kick in secondary. You want to move the liquid around faster so you're getting it in and out of the radiator and in and out of the components at a higher rate of flow. Then you can increase the static pressure, speed up the fans, and get all of that going to cool it down. So you have different options, and I think that is the option I'm going to go with this time, which is why I got the splitters. I want the fans to all ramp up at one point, and then I want the pump to ramp up at another point. Which order and how I'm going to do it, I don't know, because volume and sound is not really going to be a concern for me. I've used a 7970 with the blower cooler. If you go back and look at my older video, I did a sound comparison between the 1080 Ti and the 7970. I didn't care about the sound, and I still don't. After a year of using it at a pretty aggressive fan curve, sound doesn't bother me. I hear it. I'm used to it, it's background noise. So to me, sound is less important than quality cooling. And even with these Vardar fans, I'm really not concerned about sound. So last component I bought, and that brings us to the actual kit. So let's take a look at what's inside and how it's packaged. All right, so the box itself really isn't got a lot to it. There's not much impressiveness to it. Let me angle this down a little bit. I'll probably do this upside down so that I will open it for you. You can see it's just kind of stuffed in there. Not a whole lot of crazy packaging to look at. So let's start taking stuff out. You got your packing peanuts. On the back you have your radiator. Now for some reason in my mind this just looks, mounting hardware, a little thinner width-wise than my current H240X. And it really shouldn't be any thinner. It's just probably because it's so long it looks that way. So you can see thin fins and a lot of channels, inlet, outlet. Surprised they weren't plugged, but shouldn't be a big deal. And that's pretty much it. It's just a standard 360 radiator. What really gets you is the weight on this guy. So let me see if I can reach it. I should have had this a little more handy. Let's zero it out and see how many grams this thing weighs. 413 grams. That's really light. It's hard to believe how light this thing is. It really just stands out, and you really get a notion for aluminum, which is why it's so light. You'll hear a lot of people gripe that aluminum sucks. And while sure, it can if you mix metals, galvanic corrosion is a thing, but honestly, aluminum is a good heat dissipator. Is it as good as copper? Probably not. But it's not a negative thing. I don't know why there's so much hate for copper amongst the hardcore enthusiasts. I've done custom loops before, and I've used other pre-built loops, and it's really not a big deal what kind of materials you use as long as you stick through the same materials throughout your loop. You can sometimes mix certain metals, but it's really just a dumb idea overall. Now, one concern I have here is these screws. Let's see if I can open the package without destroying it or losing any of them. These screws are tiny. Let me get the radiator back out. These screws, you can see it because it's black on black, are tiny. That means that when I have a fan on there, it's only going to be the last thread or two that's actually going to be hooked up to this radiator, which is a little bit concerning because the way I have to mount this to my case is the fans are going to go on the top part, then there's the metal bar where the brackets are, and then under, on the inside of the case is where the radiator is going to mount to the top. And you'll see this a little more when I actually start the build. But that is a concern for me, and hopefully those fit. We'll see. I am a little concerned. So here's the 3 Vardar fans. Let me take that out. Take a look at one of them. Okay, there you go. Again, not that long of a cable, honestly, considering I have 3 of these to tie together, but decent fan. You can see the thickness. I'm not going to have a lot of screw length to get that taken care of. So that is a concern for me, that it may not fit very well. Now I know with the H240X, I had some issues in getting it mounted because of that very problem right there. Go in, you stupid thing. Caught on the tab. So I did have several problems actually getting it installed properly because of that screw length issue. Now, my case came with some anti-vibration grommets, rubber grommets that were in the socket holes for the screws. 3 fans, 360 radiator. And I had to take them out because I just couldn't get the screws far enough in to support the weight of the radiator, which also has the pump reservoir on it, and I just didn't trust it. So I had to take the grommets out. And I haven't really had any vibrations because I had to tighten it down a little farther than I would have preferred, but it works. So we'll see. All right, warning. This is an aluminum product, or aluminium, whichever part of the pond you're on. Never mix aluminum and copper products in the same loop. Consult your product install manual. Good warning. Again, galvanic corrosion is a thing. If you mix metals, don't do it. Fluid Gaming A120, A240, and A240G. Well, I don't have a 240G, but honestly, it's the same kit. You really shouldn't need to have any differences on there. So standard instructions, no big deal. File it. We'll take a look at that when we're building. Next, we get the actual GPU. And just so I can move the other box out of the way because it's huge, we have pump reservoir, tubing, and all that stuff in there. So let's move the box. Save some counter space here. All right, let's take a look at the GPU now. All right, first thing we get on top is the back plate. Not too bad. It's kind of interesting that they only put the plastic on the top side instead of on the inside that will be facing all the components. So probably want to rub that down before we install it, but it is nice that they include it. Feels like a plastic composite type material. Interesting little box. GTX Pascal included back plates. So decent instructions for how to go about putting everything together on here. It has been, in all honesty, a very long time since I've done a GPU full cover block. I've done some of those universal ones which only kind of cover the core and kind of leave the VRMs out on their own to do whatever. That was kind of the last few I'd done, so it's been a long time since I've done a full cover kit. Probably 9800 GTX days way back then. I think that was the last time I actually did it, so we'll see. Been a while. All right. Not sure what this guy is. This looks like a... Well, it doesn't say. It is an aluminum fitting. Looks like another 90 degree. I'll take it if I get 4 90 degrees. Won't complain about that. In this kit, you have all of the... These will be the VRM power phases, and then you've got the, well, these are probably the VRM ones, and then these are going to be the power phases and chokes and all that stuff. So that'll be the actual thermal pads for that. Not too bad. These are surprisingly kind of heavy. Okay, this is definitely heavier, but these are surprisingly like half to a third, maybe a fourth the weight of this block, which is pretty surprising. So this is our block. Looks pretty clean on the bottom side. From the top, you can see the actual contact points for the GPU, the VRMs, and all the power phases and things like that around it. Not a lot to really look at other than that. So what I do notice is there looks to be some little dimpling in here. It's hard to feel it with my finger, but if I drag my fingernail across it, I can feel a little bit of a dimple in some of the machining there. And there's some spots that look a little rougher on the sides. I'm interested, some little faded spots here, so I'm interested what that'll look like once I clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol. GPU section looks just fine. It just seems like some of the VRMs. But again, I'm using thermal pads, which will compress, so it should fill that, and I don't think that'll be an actual issue in any way. It's just a little interesting to see that it's not like a perfect pristine block. But on the whole, very nice product. I am pleased with that. I think that'll be a great, put the box back in, block to use, and I look forward to getting everything kind of put together on it. In this, we have some tension springs for the actual mounting to the GPU, all the other side springs, plugs for the unused holes. 2 plugs, would have been nice to get a spare plug, just in case. little bit of compound, but again, I'm going to use the Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut to cover both the GPU and the CPU. I think it'll be a better material for it. Let's put the pads down there. Figure out how this thing goes back together. There we go. We'll put this up there and we'll get the GPU kit all in there. I guess this also needs to go on the inside for this to fit properly. We'll cover that back up. Nice. All right, that's well packaged, not bad. File that to the side. And on to the most important box. All right, we got some CPU block cooler. We're not going to be using that. We have the mounting hardware for the actual reservoir pump. This is a little bracket that'll fit on a 120 mil fan slot, so you can mount it to the side of the case, to the top if you're going to do it upside down. Wouldn't recommend doing that. Or the bottom of the case. Now for me, I'm going to put mine on the bottom of the case. I already kind of talked about loop order and all of that, so mine's going to be on the very bottom of the case. And I think that'll work fine for me. I'll file that. This is an Allen key for removing all of the fittings and then cranking them down. Put it in there and rotate it. We'll see how that goes. Let's open the box up. All right, we start with our kind of stuffed in there, but we start with our tubing. It doesn't look like a ton of tubing. Has me a little bit concerned that I will not have enough to go all over my case since I have a full tower. We'll see, because I really don't have the ability to kind of stop, so what I'll probably do is I will dry fit a run, holding kind of all of it together and just make sure that I have enough to reach every aspect of my case before I actually start cutting and mounting and then tearing apart the old stuff. So we'll make sure we got enough, but nice tubing. I love that they include these jumpers. That way you can power up the pump to fill it and bleed it and get all of that done without actually having to power on every individual component, motherboard, CPU. Makes it really handy so you don't have to A, jump it yourself, or B, have a secondary power supply connected to hook it all up. This is, what is this guy? This is a pump testing adapter. That's kind of nice. You can power up and test your pump without actually having to have it inside the case either. I like that. That means I can set it all up outside. Next, we have backplates. I'm curious if my existing SwiftTech backplate will still fit. I don't think it will because the block angles are going to be a little off, but it has to go through the motherboard, and it is an X99, so maybe it'll fit. I don't know. We'll see. Next, we actually have all of the block for the CPU block mounting hardware for the screws, springs, all that good stuff, so not bad. I mentioned the splitter cable, so all of the 3 fans will come out with their power cables and plug into each one of these, and then that will need one of my extensions to get anywhere in the case because there's no way this is going to fit anywhere, so we've got the extensions ready to go on it. So nice to have that. This was in a different box. I kind of filed it to the side for a moment, but this actually belongs in here as well. This is a PWM extension cable for, I believe, the pump, but I'm not, the thin cable looks kind of cheap compared to the braided cables. These look a lot more in line with my current Corsair power supply cable, so I may use those, but this is a nice long cable, and I might be able to thread this out the back of the case. In order to get it up to the CPU's actual header on the motherboard, I think I may still need to use one of my extension cables. So this might get it out the back and up to the top, and then that'll have to get it into the actual power spot. So we'll see. Not sure how that's all going to work. Next, we have the actual CPU block. Again, aluminum, really light. Please remove, apparently. Just a basic block, EK Supremacy AX series. It's acrylic on the side, so you can kind of see in. Not really sure why, since the top is brushed aluminum and you can't see through it. There are 2 sockets over here, and I've seen it on their website where you can buy an LED illumination kit. Originally, I thought it was to stick in some aspect of the reservoir, so you could illuminate some of that, but honestly, I think they go in these 2 openings here to provide like this glowing out the side look, as you can get on some TVs now for ambient lighting. Honestly, because this is going to be mounted between RAM sticks and all that, I think that's stupid. If they wanted illumination, they were going to do it. Don't half-ass it. Make the top acrylic as well so we can see through it, and then make it illuminate or perforate this or something. I don't know. It's a nice block. I like it for its potential, but the LED and all that stuff, I think it's a dumb design for that because it's not going to work right. Now, reservoir pump. You can see the pathetic little cable that they included on this. I mean, no one's going to mount it like that. They should have at least doubled that length to make it viable. It is a nice system. You can see the fittings that came with it. I'm going to be replacing those with my 90-degree so that they can go up and out. The lid on this, I originally thought I was going to buy a much taller tube. They have them, I think this is a 60. I think they then have a 120, and then they have a 140 tall one. I kept it with the stock one for two reasons. One, I'm not worried about running out of fluid. Because of its placement in my case, I'm not going for the aesthetic of having a nice tube. I'm not going to get that look because of where I have to mount it, which you'll see in the build. And lastly, my case, even with it sitting on top of this plate, my case, it'll be way down in the bottom, and the case has the sides that kind of go up, and then the door mounts down here, and it's got metal up to about here, and then the window starts. So as you're looking at it head on, most of this will be hidden. I think it may kind of be that much that's visible, so I'm not really concerned about having a tall tube. I think it would actually look worse to have a big tall tube, whereas here you're going to have this mostly blocked out, and it'll be dark in the bottom of the case. So I think it'll look a little better. As I keep mine on the floor and I sit, I'll be able to look down and see it without too many issues and look at the impeller and all that stuff and see that it's full or empty, so not bad. I like how it has the EK kind of logo etched in there as well. It's hard to see the E on the bottom, but the K and all that on top is very visible, so I like it. It's a good little kit. I am excited to get it built. The way I'm going to have to run everything is I'm going to dry run the tubing, kind of put this on this, of course, and set that in the case, and kind of map out how everything's going to fit, because I mentioned I have a couple concerns with screws that may need replacing. I may need additional tubing. And there's no way I'm going to be able to kind of build all of this and then say, oh, I'm missing some extra parts, or this isn't long enough. Let's just go ahead and order some replacements. I do have a micro center nearby. I may be able to get some things there, but if I have to order anything online like tubing, I'm going to be dead in the water, and I can't be without my PC that long. So I'm going to dry run as much as I possibly can before I actually go to build everything. And I probably won't record any of the dry fitting just because it'll be boring, as listening to me blab on forever is boring enough. But it's mostly just going to be testing it. If I run into any issues or I see something that is worth filming, then I will definitely grab the camera and we'll get it recorded for you. Otherwise, we will do kind of a time lapse when I get to the actual building of the system, and we'll take it from there when we put everything together. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think it'll be an interesting build. Again, I have done custom loops. I have done I haven't done hard tubing just because it's a pain in the butt and I don't have any of the tools, nor do I want to have any of the tools for that. It's just too much of a headache for me. I love the look though. But I have done some where the tubing, I was able to get it tight enough by very careful measuring that there was very little sag in it, that at any type of a distance it looked kind of like hard tubing. So I'm hoping I can pull some of that illusion off with the way I've designed and plotted the cabling and the way I'm going to have it kind of bend, and we'll see. It's kind of flimsy. There's not a lot of strength to this tubing. I've had some where it was a lot thicker and the tubing had a little more rigidity to it. It was still flexible, but it was a lot stiffer. So we'll see. I'm not sure exactly how it'll look, but I think it'll look good in the end, and I am excited to get going on it. So thank you for watching. We'll see you in the build. It's gonna be probably a couple weeks before I can do it because I've got a lot going on, and this is gonna probably be a 6-hour install. Not that it needs to be, but I really wanna do it right. This doesn't need to be a speed build. I wanna do it properly. So we'll see how it goes, and then we'll see how long it actually takes. So we'll see you then. Thank you for watching.